This is the season of celebrations. Proms, performances, graduations. We see pictures of large gatherings of excited students and proud family members on social media. Some pictures are individual shots. Others may include other family members or friends. And then there are those that show the wide panoramas of hundreds of people all gathered for one purpose, to celebrate someone's achievements. At times such as this, we feel as if we are part of a bigger whole, a community of people joyfully celebrating. There is even a sense of community, of commonality, of joint experience. But at the end of the day, each family, each group of friends, each individual configuration go to their own homes and neighborhoods. We revel in these large events because they carry a collective energy. There is an electricity there. We talk about them for days, months, weeks, maybe even years if we are the student or we are the friend or family of a student. These communal festivities are also one-offs. A sense of community without the commitments and the intensities of a lived community. Do you catch that difference? We are drawn into the spirit of a shared experience, but we do not have the day-to-day glue that a lived experience offers and demands. The early Christ followers had returned to Jerusalem after the tumultuous experience of Jesus' arrest, his sham trial, his assassination, and his subsequent resurrection, to do what they had always done, to be together in community. The occasion mentioned in the text that Nancy read was a celebration called Shavuot, the annual Hebrew festival of gratitude at the time of the wheat harvest. A communal mindset was not foreign to the early Christ followers. The Hebrew culture and religion were rich with commonalities, commemorations, dedications and rituals of blessing and forgiveness and giving, signifying the centrality of God, whom they believed lived among them. Both in the Hebrew Bible and in our later Christian scriptures, there is a corporate dynamic, a strong sense of community. Remember how the Hebrews lived as exiles in Egypt as an entire people group. How the same Hebrews, a group of a million people by then, were in the wilderness together. There were stories of how one person's unfaithfulness brought a curse to the entire community. And in the very earliest records we have of the Christ followers' community life, there are statements such as, they and their household were baptized. It was not my and mine, or you and yours. It was us and ours. In other words, the ancient Hebrews, as well as the early Christ followers, did not need to develop a communal mindset. They already had it. We, however, have been saturated by individualism, capitalism, and independence for generations. It has not always served us well. We, as a result, would need to decide to cultivate and practice something that is entirely foreign to us, if we truly wanted to live in community. What contributed to a strong communal practice for the early Christ followers? If we look at the group described here, there's a few things we can observe. These diverse women, men, young people lived in an existential threat. This was not new to them, and Jesus' apprehension and assassination dramatically underscored their minority, subjugated status, ruled by and living under an authoritarian empire. When entire populations are targeted as inferior, A sense of collegiality within that population is inevitable. Add to that the dynamic of having spent 3 years with Jesus, having learned and lived a different reality, having hoped that this would in some way relieve their oppression. All of that served to bind them together as one. Secondly, in addition to living in subjugation, their experience of Christ's brutal death was a trauma from which they would not quickly emerge. They had seen and felt and heard things that were undoubtedly topics of animated conversation, possibly even arguments, and maybe nighttime terrors. Why? Why had this happened? Why now? How could this ever have happened? What will happen to us now? Will we ever be safe? This kind of trauma connects people with one another. Thirdly, the joy and the energy, as well as the fear and the horror of journeying with Jesus, put them in a unique place. And it could also have given rise to worry and impatience and blame, hard feelings, maybe even jockeying for position. After all, none of them knew how anything was going to move forward. They only had one directive. Jesus had said to them, "Go to Jerusalem and wait for the coming of the Spirit." But what exactly had he meant by that? What kind of a time frame were they looking at? And what were they to do in the meantime? None of that was clarified. Living with this kind of uncertainty also creates a sense of community. And so, they did what they knew to do. They prayed. They stayed in Jerusalem. They celebrated their known festivals, which I can imagine offered a sense of stability during this chaotic time. Possibly they questioned whether a spirit would really appear. Or they may have dug deeply into their history of encounters with the divine, giving them courage that God could be trusted. They were, after all, a company of people who believed in an active divine presence in their community. The stories they had heard passed down through generations included God appearing to a murderer who had fled into the desert, we know him as Moses, through a burning bush that was not consumed. They would have known that God traveled with this entire community of liberated slaves, appearing as a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. They would have heard about finally making it through that desert and reaching a holy mountain where God appeared as a massive fire and windstorm. They would have known that later, when the Hebrews had built their portable house of worship, the tabernacle, a pillar of fire hovered over it as a symbol of constant divine presence. They knew about the divine showing up in their oppressed, ordinary, exhausting lives. They also knew the connection between God and fire. This type of worldview, this comprehensive understanding of their people's history, the ups and the downs, the human and the divine, created a higher level of receptivity for the transcendent. If you wonder what qualifies as transcendent, here are a few thoughts. It's part of a definition. It's a phenomenon that goes beyond or above the range of normal or mere human experience. It also refers to all that exists apart from and not subject to the limitations of the material universe. That would certainly define these historical Hebrew experiences. The Jesus followers knew this history well. It shaped their current worldview. It gave them an alertness to recognize similar encounters with the divine in their lives. we could point to a number of factors that appear to have further made them receptive for a divine encounter. But I give just one disclaimer. This list cannot be used as a formula. They gathered together in community. They were united. They were deeply committed, and they prayed continually. It's important to remember that they did not only come together at a festival like this Shavuot, the harvest Thanksgiving, we now call it Pentecost. They gathered to pray every day. They did not have a Pentecost phenomenon every time they met to pray. But each time they encountered the divine, they did have a dramatic divine encounter one time when they gathered together. One time. And it changed everything. I think it is safe to say that there was no one in that crowd who could have predicted what this time together would be like. Regardless of past experience, every encounter with the divine is unique. On this day, like on many days, they all met together. Only this time, something dramatically different happened. A violent, howling wind, flames of fire that rested on every person in the room, and the sudden arrival of many people from the city who had heard the noise. There's a portion of the text that wasn't read this morning, and that describes multitudes of people that had gathered in Jerusalem to celebrate this festival. The noise caught their attention, so they came to check this out, this unusual dynamic. They too crammed into this space where these Christ followers were. Some of them asked questions. Some of them made fun of the people speaking in languages they didn't know and accused them of drunkenness. Well, that's a reasonable assumption if you operate outside of the realm of the transcendent. We have no indication at all that the Christ followers expected anything like this. They had gone about their lives faithfully, routinely doing what they knew they had to do. Celebrate festivals, pray, stay in community. All they had been told was wait in Jerusalem until the Spirit would be sent. But they had no idea what that would be like. We have talked for years about welcoming new people to our community of faith, had conversations about what we needed to have in place. So I wonder, what might the coming of the Spirit look like right here? I don't know. The early Christ followers didn't know either. They simply did what they knew to do. For them, that consisted of gathering together regularly, praying constantly, following Jesus' directive. What is it for us? What could it be? Are we ready? Are we preparing? Some things can only happen together, but transcendence doesn't appear on command. Throughout history, God has made dramatic appearances in a variety of ways at unexpected moments, but these monumental interventions have always followed long periods in which the divine was active, but as a non-intrusive, consistent, steadying, comforting, transforming presence. In this season of celebration, we feel we are part of a bigger whole, a community of people joyfully celebrating. Can we also envision a faith community that is our bigger whole? A faith community that celebrates together, that prays together, that is committed to live in community with all of its commitments and intensities, its beauty and its brokenness. Can we look at history with the purpose of noticing the work of the divine? Can we recount divine encounters or interventions, we might say, as well as celebrate the staying power of the Spirit? Do we have a desire to move away from individualism, from egocentrism, from a capitalist mindset, to embrace a sense of commitment to one another, because some things have to happen together. We must remember that at the first Pentecost, these words were spoken about God's promise. I will pour out my Spirit on all humankind, even on the most insignificant of my people, both women and men. I will pour out my Spirit. I invite you to expect an encounter with the divine.